Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. This podcast contains general information and is not in any way medical advice. Today it's my pleasure to welcome James Nuzzo to the program. James is an exercise science researcher with particular interests, obviously, in exercise and its benefits, which is, as listeners will know, is important for health, and also has taken, I suppose, a particular interest in men's health, and also from an exercise and sports perspective. So, James, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming in.
Yep.
So first up, as is my want, people who may not be familiar with you, just tell us a little bit about your background and how you've ended up in Perth. We were chatting off air that ancestors of yours went to America in the early part of the 20th century. So, just give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, well, so the surname is Nuzzo, so that's an Italian surname. So great-grandparents would have come over from Italy in the early 1900s to the U.S., so born and raised in rural Pennsylvania. So the only way you'd know the name of the town I'm from is if you happen to know what a Zippo lighter is. So if you look,
must say I don't. Sorry.
Yeah, Zippo lighter. It's the lighter that you see in all the World War II movies. The soldiers lighting up a cigarette and so on.
Okay.
So Zippo lighters are manufactured in Bradford, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. Bradford, Pennsylvania is the small town of about 10,000 people that I'm from, and it's known for the Zippo lighter and a few other things. So I'm from that area of the U.S., lived in North Carolina and also Florida for a couple years doing studying and research, and then eventually moved to Sydney in 2013 to do my PhD at the University of New South Wales in physiology or exercise physiology. Was there for about 6 years and then moved to beautiful Perth, Western Australia, where I've been very happy for the past, 5 years now?
Yeah, so what brought you to Perth?
Yeah, so my PhD and postdoc supervisor, she took a position at Edith Cowan University. Mm-hmm. So I eventually followed her here. And, I'd been in Sydney for, 6.5 years. And initially it was all quite stimulating, but by that time I was also ready for something a little bit different, something a little bit calmer.
Yeah.
Less people piled on top of each other.
Fair, yeah.
Beautiful beaches here. The bush is there, Swan Valley. So Perth is the place to be, I think.
Mm.
Yeah.
And how did you get interested in exercise science? And we'll go into this in a bit more detail later, but I suppose particularly resistance type training.
Growing up as a kid, especially in rural America, sports is one of the only things to do, and it's, very highly promoted. And played a lot of baseball, American football, basketball, and things like that. So then in high school, I got introduced to anatomy and physiology. I was able to take a course in that, and I found that quite fascinating. And then I was learning in anatomy and physiology with what was happening, like with me on the playing field. And why was it that, I don't know, this player could run so fast and then this player wasn't so fast? And just trying to figure out those sorts of questions. So I had an older brother who went to Slippery Rock University, which is where I went for my bachelor's degree in rural Pennsylvania.
Right.
And
interesting name, Slippery Rock.
Slippery Rock, so very well known for its name. And it also does a pretty good job with its education as well. It's a very teaching-oriented university. It's a smaller school. So I had an older brother that went through that program, and I was familiar with it. And so I just sort of followed in his footsteps. And then he went on to be more of a practitioner, and I've gone more in the academic and research direction. Yeah.
And strength training is or has been probably associated, in my opinion, wrongly, and it's something I've spoken about at times, with bodybuilding and people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I think women in particular are concerned about getting too big, which again is not going to happen unless you really sort of go out of your way, and it can be achieved, but you have to make some effort. But the concept of exercise, I think, for almost everybody is going for a run or a bike ride or a swim. and strength training doesn't get as much airtime. I suppose two points to chat about. One is, why is that? Is it just the obvious that you have to actually get some equipment, whereas to go for a walk you don't? And also, the benefits of strength and resistance training.
Yeah. Why doesn't it get as much airtime? I think, like you said, with aerobic activity, you have sort of more options of things to do that fit within that category. And in fact, from a kind of public health perspective, when trying to monitor and measure these things at a population level, they break it out into two different types of activity. You have your muscle strengthening activities, and then you have your aerobic activities. And under the category of aerobic activity, there's a lot more things to check the box for. Okay. And that's why people end up meeting those guidelines much more than they do the muscle strengthening. And then, I think with some of the muscle strengthening activities like weight training, we get introduced to them at a later age as children or adolescents. And then by that stage, I think certain people might just be a bit fearful to give it a go. And we know that but particularly among women, like lack of knowledge or comfort in the weight room is a barrier to their participation in weight training. So I think that's an issue, whereas something like walking or running, you just can, in most cases, walk out the door and do that. Weight training you can do a little bit more easily than people think. You don't have to go to a gym to do that, but there is sort of that barrier of oftentimes needing the proper equipment and stuff, whereas for walking and running, you just need a pair of shoes and go.
I mean, when I started going to gyms, which is literally in the last century, they were typically open, so many hours per day. There weren't, I wouldn't say there weren't that many of them. In fact, in Perth, quite a few went bankrupt in the after the stock market crash in the early 90s. And then when you think back, it was so obvious. They were selling people life memberships for not a lot of money, and I don't think you can provide services for people for years and years and years without some money coming in the door. But now you've got a pop-up 24/7 gym on, if not every street corner, then every other street corner, and you can go and exercise at 3 a.m. if that's what you want to do. It's not my scene, but so I think accessibility is greater, and relatively speaking, cost has actually come down. A lot of these ones only cost a small amount of money. But I think there's the potential risk for people to do exercises where they can injure themselves if they lift too much. They think, I'm going to push this or squat that, and they haven't done much previously. And I'll always say to patients that what you don't want to do is overdo it at the start because you could injure yourself and then it puts you off and then you don't get any of the benefit.
Yep.
So sort of, thoughts on what, where and how people can start. And also, increasingly, councils have different exercise stations in different parks. Are they sort of useful, or do they just sort of gather dust?
Well, so I live near Lake Monger, beautiful Lake Monger. They have some.
Yeah.
I do see people using them, but that's a particular kind of demographic that goes there. One of the limitations of those, it has trade-offs. So usually you're just using your own body weight when you use that park equipment. So the pull-up bar, for example. And that might work great for maybe someone like me that can do a few pull-ups, but there's a lot of people that can't do a single pull-up. So you can just hang there if you want, and that's not bad. Yep. But what I'm saying is there's no way to adjust the resistance.
Yeah,
right. You have to lift your own body weight. And now for that particular exercise, the pull-up, that can be impossible for some people. And then on the other side of the spectrum, for a certain type of movement, your own body weight could be too light. It might not challenge you enough.
Right.
That's actually one of the benefits of having access to weight training equipment, because you can adjust the pin and you can use the appropriate weight. You even have machines that will help you do a pull-up that will kind of remove some of your own body mass for you so that you can do it. So I think, I think there's a potential for the kind of the public health sphere to maybe make those little things out to be more than they are, but I see people use the ones that I come across. And what was the first part of your question? Oh, the initiation into a program.
So getting started for people. What can be helpful, or through what the work you've done. And you mentioned about some barriers, and there's different ones for different people, and I suppose at different age groups. But what have you found that can be some of the ways to address barriers for people? Like, I don't know where to start, I don't know how to start. Those types of questions for the person who really is looking from the outside with a little bit of trepidation, thinks, maybe this would be a good thing for me to do, but how do I go there?
Yeah. I want to firstly agree with your point about going too hard too quickly, in the sense that for someone that's not really done any exercise before, I think that can be quite discouraging. So I actually tell people not to do that, because oftentimes you'll get delayed onset muscle soreness. And although someone like myself is very familiar with that and comfortable with that, some people interpret that as almost like a serious injury. Even though it's just your muscle's natural recovery process. And then they get discouraged and they don't go back to the gym. But it's all because they went too hard all at once.
Yes.
So it's good to get excited about exercise and, get in there, but just take it slow. Like, establish the habit. As far as breaking down sort of the barriers, if one of the barriers is kind of lack of comfort around other people, like lifting weights around other people, one thing is, to acquire more knowledge, you can go to the internet. There's all sorts of sources that you can learn. You can watch people on YouTube performing exercise so that you know what the movement kind of at least looks like. So when someone says the bicep curl, okay, what is that? So you search it and you at least know what it looks like. So that's one way to get some knowledge. Talk with friends or family members that you trust who know what they're talking about, and they can give you some advice. But to a certain extent, you just kind of have to also just go for it too. You can't be nursed and babied along too much.
You just have to make the decision and make a start. Which probably, whilst we've been talking, has made me sort of reflect that we've put the cart a little bit in front of the horse. So people are listening thinking, well, this is all very well and good. Why would I even bother? Sure. And certainly in an older age group, a condition which virtually gets no media or other attention, of sarcopenia, which is loss of muscle mass, which contributes to falls in an older age group. You hear a lot about osteoporosis, fair enough, and I'm on the board of Arthritis and Osteoporosis WA, but you don't hear much about sarcopenia. And that is a condition that can be, to a reasonable degree, prevented as loss of muscle mass as one gets older by doing resistance exercise. There's no amount of aerobic or cardio exercise that offsets sarcopenia. So what are the, what are the benefits of resistance exercise? People that might be listening out there thinking, well, this all sounds good. Why would I bother? Yeah.
Well, you nailed some of the key ones there, and that is, the primary purpose of resistance exercise is the preservation of muscle mass and muscle strength. And so, you'll get side benefits of the cardiovascular system and other organ systems, but primarily you're focused on, with muscle strengthening exercise, the nervous system and the muscle. So that includes muscle mass, but it also, so a lot of people might not realize what makes your muscle create force is that you send signals from your brain down through your spinal cord out to the muscle. That's what makes it go. So you're trying to preserve those nervous system connections, and we call that voluntary activation. Okay. So voluntary activation is your nervous system's ability to drive the muscle to create its maximal force. And that is another thing that declines with aging, and also with certain motor impairments, so multiple sclerosis, spinal cord injury, and so on and so forth, stroke. So we're trying to preserve the strength of the nervous system and the muscle. Once muscle strength goes down, increased risk of falls, increased risk of death. I think weaker individuals typically end up in hospital for longer when they have hospital stays. And also in terms of just occupational performance, particularly if you're someone that works in a, physical labor sort of job. I mean, you're already doing some physical labor on it, but also helps with firefighter performance, military performance, and so on. So, and of course, once you have a fall, if you break your hip, then you're in the hospital, and then you're laying around. Not only do you continue to atrophy, but then your cardiovascular system doesn't
deconditioning.
You're deconditioning everything. So, you don't want to have a fall, and one of the best ways to do that is to do physical exercise, strength training, balance training as well.
Is there, how should I put it? For people, is there an ideal age to start, or is any age a good time to start?
If you're not doing it, start it. Yeah. The only thing is, for years there's been a debate at what age in terms of kids is appropriate. That age continues to come more forward and forward to younger and younger kids. But it's usually the emphasis initially is on technique, so using light weights and just learning the technique, so that when you get a little bit older, you can start to load up a little bit more.
And I suppose back in the days before little kids spent all their times on devices, they'd be out on, I don't know if you can even use the term anymore, but I'm going to do it anyway, what used to be called monkey bars.
Oh, yeah.
And you'd be hanging, you'd be sweating. And I was never particularly I never had great coordination, so it wasn't really my forte. But they'd be hanging and climbing, and that uses different parts of the body. So they probably didn't need to do any formal training because it was just happening at lunchtime.
Yep.
I do remember being at a conference some years ago, and I think it was work actually done out of one of the Sydney universities, I can't remember which one, and they looked at strength training in an older age group, and I think the oldest person that they found had been able to lay down new muscle mass was 103. And I've also seen some other papers over the years looking at strength training for people starting in their 80s, where they haven't done it before. So I suppose that leads to the next point, and obviously starting at a level that's appropriate.
Yep.
Can you ever be too old? As in to start, taking into account your personal circumstances.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And you're the medical doctor, so you'd have to take into consideration all those other factors.
But like you see these Masters games and people throwing shot puts, obviously not as heavy as 20-year-olds, but still doing it.
Yep. Look, I'm all for it. And in fact, you mentioned the work out of Sydney. Some of the really good randomized controlled trials were done in Sydney that showed it's not just strength training but power training. So by power training, you're taking a lighter resistance but as fast a velocity as possible.
Yeah.
And that is probably even more beneficial for older adults than traditional strength training.
Right.
And that's because with power training, you are really getting the type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers, which are some of the first to atrophy with aging. So, so what I'm saying is some of that really good work came out of Sydney. There was work prior to that, particularly out of the Scandinavian countries, but we've been studying resistance training in older adults for decades now, and it's all pretty safe.
Yeah. So to sort of track back a little bit, why do you think this message doesn't get out there? Are there barriers there? Are there vested interests? Is it just not flavour of the week? But I mean, this has been known for years, and yet still with a lot of the messaging, yes, they tell you to find 30, but there's still that implication that it's 30 minutes for a walk, not incorporating any resistance. Or the other one, which doesn't get a lot of airplay, which I think is useful, is stretching and flexibility training. Things like yoga or Tai Chi, or just simple stretches of the muscle doesn't get a lot of interest either. Yeah.
Look, I think there's individual level barriers to exercise. Perceived lack of time. You notice how I say the word perceived lack of time?
Absolutely. We've all got 24 hours in the day. Absolutely.
If you objectively look at people's schedule, you will find that there is time. And actually, there's a new sort of trend coming out of research, which I've been involved in a little bit, which is this idea of snacking on exercise, meaning doing little bouts of it throughout the day.
Okay.
So if you're working from home and you just want to take a break from the computer, just jump on the floor and do a set of push-ups till fatigue or something, or a set of squats or something,
Yep.
and then just go back to work. So this is called snacking. It's kind of a new trendy thing. But yes, individual level barriers, having a sort of a disability of some kind, knowledge about exercise. And then there's more of the kind of environmental, social barriers. So, there's not a gym close enough to my house, or I'm not able to drive and there's no transportation. And so there can be multiple layers of barriers, but I think where there's a will, there's a way, and you can always make it happen. And what, I don't know, someone like myself tries to do is just throw out all these different strategies that you can try to adopt to just do something. But yeah, we know now from decades of research that resistance training is safe. So I think there could still be a little bit of a myth that maybe weight training is dangerous. I don't know how much that myth is still sticking around. I think we're mostly getting over that. But maybe within the older generations, it's still hanging around, or that it's kind of maybe for women, that's only a guy's activity or something like that. That might still be around in certain age demographics.
Yeah. And you're obviously in the world of research and academia, which, trying to think how to put this politely, has got a lot to answer for in more recent times, and seems far less interested in thinking rather than conforming. And you put out a piece just last week about the rise of woke medicine, and I say I observe this. You look at particularly out of the States, but not just here, and there's almost no medical condition that doesn't have to wrap into somehow its impact on a particular group.
Yep.
Maybe it's there, but maybe if you just specifically really want to look for it, you're more likely to find it. Yep. And that's impacted your ability to get, even to get work published, because you're asking questions that people don't seem to want to know the answers to. How do you survive in that? I'm trying to think of the best word. Toxic is the one that comes to mind. Environment.
It's really hard, and it's very frustrating, particularly the peer review process. So if I have a sort of commentary that I want to publish, which questions woke medicine or something like this, I could go to 5-6 different journals and I'd get an editor desk rejection right away. And so now I've been around long enough that I can kind of navigate that territory a little bit. So this paper that recently came out, published in a journal that most people won't recognize, but I kind of know the editor there, and I know that he's open to publishing this sort of thing. So that's why it's in that journal, but that was after going to a few others first. Yeah. So, the rise of woke medicine I don't think has been fully appreciated yet, fully understood, and I'm trying to articulate it and spread that message through my newsletter, the Nuzzo letter, that will come out kind of piece by piece. But this is the first big sort of analysis to just show people, look, you can do keyword searches in PubMed and find woke medicine, and here's the evidence for it.
Well, that's what I was going to get to. That people listening might think, that's just a throwaway line. I don't think it is, but people might think that's the case. But you've actually done data searches on this and gone into PubMed, which for people who aren't familiar is probably the biggest repository of medical research worldwide. It's run by the NIH in America. Is that correct? Yeah. So you can find studies on pretty much everything in there. Yeah. And you've actually interrogated that database. And come up with this sort of rise of woke medicine. What did you find?
Yeah, so PubMed has millions of research articles indexed in it, and it's primarily biomedical and health research. And that's really important to understand because I think for a little while we were told that kind of critical theory, woke stuff was going to stay in the humanities, and that's where it was just going to hang out because that's where it originated. That's not at all true. PubMed indexes primarily health research and medical research, and what my search showed. So I think I searched for like 156 different woke phrases or terms, and it showed that it's widespread and that it has increased geometrically since about, well, it's been the past 15 years, but particularly around like 2016, just this huge increase in the use of words that reflect woke concepts.
Yep.
So anything from the word social justice or health inequity, toxic masculinity, what else? Just you go through the whole list.
Yeah.
You can go on James Lindsay's New Discourses website. He's got a woke dictionary,
Okay.
and that's where I got some of the terms. You can actually look for the term critical theory or critical race theory, or even the names of individuals who are associated with like critical theory philosophy, like Foucault. You can search Foucault's name turns up in, I found like 200 or 300 articles indexed in PubMed. His name turns up in the abstract of the article. And this is what I'm saying, woke medicine is here, and that's the evidence for it. So.
Okay. So again, for the listeners, Foucault is a philosopher. Is that correct?
Yeah. So
and for me as well.
No. Look, I'm still learning this space a little bit as well, but I think Foucault was pretty well one of the leaders.
He's not a doctor.
No.
Or a scientist.
I think he was either a philosopher or a historian in France, maybe.
Yeah. So he shouldn't be in the abstract of medical research papers. One wouldn't expect in the normal course of events.
That's right. But health researchers have found a way to work him in, and it's primarily for sort of political reasons. So.
And that appears to be a lot of the problem, that people will do research in areas that gets funding, and funding is driven politically, not by what's actually useful to research or what may benefit the community.
That's right.
And as a clinician, that matters, because ultimately what I would suggest to people in the recommend to patients in the surgery is informed, obviously by their own personal circumstances, but the application of what's been looked at. So if we're not looking at that which is going to be useful or beneficial to most people, maybe we're getting to that sort of stage of the Roman Empire with medical research as well.
Yeah. So the way that I kind of am looking at it, and I don't know exactly if this is proper yet, but I think it feels like a push away from the concept of sort of like personalized medicine, or kind of, and also personal responsibility for your own health and that type of thing. The emphasis of woke medicine is more on the structural or social determinants of health. And those are a couple of the words that were included in my search. And so look, I take the approach that, health outcome is due to nature and nurture, so biology and environment, and the choices that you make within that framework. But this movement is all about the social, environment, structural things. And then what happens is once you go on and on about that, and you say that that's the key to better health, then the funding bodies focus all on that.
Yeah.
And then they fund that research, and then you say, oh, yeah, look, here it is. And then it just keeps going and going and going. And so I don't know where the end is. If you look at funding bodies right now, you'll see these words coming up over and over again.
And it's self-perpetuating.
That's right.
And there are social and environmental components to health. They're not the only ones. They're part of the mix. But ultimately, and I see this in a lot of work done on obesity, this concept of the obesogenic environment. Well, yes, you can buy a donut, you can buy chocolates, but I've never seen anybody go past a fast food outlet and some sort of crane comes out from the top of it, picks up the car off the road and directs it through the drive-through. I've never seen that. Maybe I'm missing something. So essentially what it says is we all, and for whatever city, live in the same environment. We make choices. Yes, if it's next door to us, that may make it easier for us, but ultimately it still comes back to individual. And as soon as we say it's everybody, it's the environment, it's not you, then you are excused from having to take any responsibility for your own decisions. And as soon as you're excused from taking responsibility from your own decisions, well, unfortunately, it's human nature to sort of do that. And then when it doesn't go according to plan, it's everybody else's fault and they should pay to fix it up. And that's why we see a crisis in the health system.
Yeah, like 100%. And so glad to hear you say all this, because this is what I am going on about, which is it's removing basically agency from the equation. And it's saying, so obesogenic environment was probably one of the words that was included in my search. I'm very familiar with it, and it is part of this scheme. And, you know, for people that think, I don't know, you guys are just being a little bit silly, there was an editorial published in Lancet Public Health, I believe, and I will have cited this multiple times now, which essentially said that people are not able to control their own body weights, and that their body weights are determined by the environment. I think that's borderline medical malpractice. Now, these Lancet editorials, another thing I've tried to point out to people is they oftentimes have no author listed. There are no conflict of interest statements, none of that. It just says signed off, Lancet Public Health. And those are really dangerous statements to the extent that people actually believe them, which I find hard to believe. Telling people that they can't really do much about their body weight. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so disempowering, but then it becomes self-perpetuating. Yep. Was that part, you mentioned about the Lancet, some years ago there was this initiative called Eat Lancet, which got a lot of money from, I think it was Norwegian, I wouldn't swear to it, corporation that was pushing basically fake meat. So all this highly processed food, which is just the worst. I've said this before on the podcast. If somebody wants to be a vegetarian in particular, or a vegan even, great. That's what you want to do it. Live your own life. If that works for you, fantastic. But if you only want to eat vegetables. Don't look for vegetables that have been, turned into something that they are not, with massive amounts of processing, lots of additives and preservatives. Yep. So this Eat Lancet, which is also just, and I'm not quite sure I really want to go down this path, but is also sort of joined, if not joined at the hip, then close to this whole, climate thing. So you shouldn't eat food that damages the climate. And I'm absolutely unconvinced about this, emissions from the rear ends of cows. I just don't buy that at all. Yep. But that's beside the point. Yep. But these things are all hidden. People do that, and I think the public and doctors, if it's the Lancet or it's the BMJ, which is the British Medical Journal, or the New England Journal, somehow these are pristine, publications that are above, grubby commercial interests, and they're not.
No.
No. At least commercial interests are obvious. If a company's trying to sell you something, they're very upfront. We're trying to sell you this. Okay, it's an ad. I have to take notice of it if I don't. But if it's hidden, then I might think this is independent, and it isn't. I mean, how much of this, from your observations from inside the tent, do you see of that go on as well, starting perhaps at that Eat Lancet and broadening out?
Yeah, I do know that paper you're talking about in Lancet. There were many concerns about that. That is not the only one. There's lots of papers like that. Part of my word search for the woke nomenclature included climate-related words, because they are tying in climate stuff to all this health stuff. It's just an intersectional sort of word salad jumble of concepts that's being thrown together right now. And I think the days of Lancet, BMJ, New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA being these very prestigious journals, not anymore. They will still publish some reasonable things, but the journals that I'm searching in my PubMed search, I mean, those are some of the key journals that get that include these words. So they are very compromised at this point, and I'm not sure if they can recover or what's going to happen with publishing in the future.
Look, we might almost be getting to that. I think Alan Greenspan might have, or was it Milton Friedman, turned the coin about creative destruction. I mean, we're seeing in a similar vein the mainstream media struggling, free-to-air TV, newspapers, in the face of independent media, which of course they criticise. But I regard myself as independent media, notwithstanding also appear at times in mainstream.
Yeah.
But it may well be, from what you've just said there, James. Do you see that some of these legacy, in inverted commas, publications, I don't think they're at that stage yet, could be supplanted by new journals that are actually doing what these ones originally set out to do, which is to be independent, to be questioning, to not accept the narrative, to come from the standpoint, my current beliefs are wrong and need to be proved to be correct, rather than I'm right and I just need to confirm that I'm right.
Yeah. There's heaps of journals out there. I mean, one of the problems is there's so many, and there's so many bad ones. But there are, I suppose, alternatives popping up. But someone like myself, what I'm starting to do is transition over to Substack, for example, and publish a little bit more there. I still do try to put some things into journals, and other things that I would normally want to submit to a journal as a commentary or opinion piece, I'm mostly not even bothering anymore, because it's not worth the frustration of peer review. It sits under review for several months. It's a broken system. And I don't know when it's going to collapse or change, but it is very broken right now. So, but I think what's going to happen is those journals are going to try to hold on to their old credibility and take shots at people that try to publish elsewhere. Oh, you didn't publish in the Lancet or the New England Journal of Medicine, and we're so prestigious. But no, that was you decades ago.
Yeah.
You now, no.
Well, this is a little bit like the criticism of independent media from what sometimes mainstream, what some people refer to as legacy media. It's the same argument. Yes. You shouldn't listen to them because we're more important. Well, nothing stays the same forever. But again, as an external observer in terms of research, it sort of increasingly struck me that people trot out peer review, like peer review means it's high quality. No, it increasingly strikes me that peer review, maybe I'm being a bit harsh, and please tell me if I am, essentially now you've written some paper that coincides with what your funders, and particularly political funders, want, and you get a couple of your mates to put an elephant stamp on it, and that's been peer reviewed.
That's right. So
is that harsh, or is that...
No, it's all very fair. I think, okay, so let's go into peer review. So what happens is you finish writing your paper, you submit it to a journal. One thing that many listeners won't realize is that when you go to submit your paper, you can nominate people to review your paper. So you can suggest to the editor, which people you might want to review. Now, not all journals have that option, but many do. And then you can also select people that you don't want to review your paper. Now, the editor doesn't have to follow any of your advice, but one reason why journals do this, and this gets back to how broken peer review is that it's really difficult to find peer reviewers, so the editor wants help in identifying people to review papers.
Okay.
The reason it's so hard to find peer reviewers is because it's an entirely voluntary system.
Yes.
So even
you
though
don't get paid for doing it,
which is a huge problem.
Part of your contribution to the advancement of science.
Yes, but it's coming from major publishers that make a ton of money.
Yeah.
But what's happening is a lot of people are realizing that and tapping out. At least, I think people that are good independent thinkers. So good reviewers are kind of tapping out of the system.
Yeah.
You're left with a certain pool of reviewers who are all kind of on the same track, and you can suggest those people to review your papers. Now, that being said...
Can that be a bit of a two-way street? You review me and I'll review you?
Yeah. Now, in theory, what you're kind of taught when you're a PhD student is, okay, you don't suggest someone have had a relationship with in the past, I don't know what it is, 5 or 6 years or something like that. So recommend someone you've never worked with before who can provide a neutral opinion. But, you know, how many people actually follow that rule? Probably none. So, yeah, there's many issues with peer review. I have still had good experiences, people that have looked at my work fairly, but there are also reviewers that have huge biases and agendas. And when you only have 2 people review your paper and one of them is just a complete nut job, which I've talked about on my Substack, I've gone through different stories. When one person says no, then the editor rejects your paper. And that's after it sat under review for, let's say, 6 months. So this is a huge problem. So most research is publicly funded in one way or another. I'll know the answer to something right now, and then it sits under review for, let's say, 6 months without the public being aware of the results that they helped fund.
Yes.
Then it got rejected, so I have to submit somewhere else, and then it goes another 6 months. And this process. So
it could take a couple of years.
That's right. So
and that's after you finished it, which might have taken a couple of years to start with.
That's right. Yeah. And one thing that is popping up that's a little bit promising is this idea of preprints. So preprints are manuscript or kind of word versions of your paper that you submit to the journal. There are preprint servers where you can upload this version of your paper for the public to see.
Okay.
But it's not the final version of the paper. It hasn't undergone peer review, but it's a way to get some initial information out there.
Okay.
So that's something that's happening. How much all this is going to change? It's very messy right now, so it's hard for me to give good answers.
So these preprints are the paper that's been submitted for review, but hasn't been reviewed.
That's correct.
But typically, I mean, when they're reviewed, if they I'm guessing mostly there aren't wholesale changes made to a paper from this preprint stage to the final stage. There might be some tweaks or adjustments, but essentially, if it's approved, then it'll be the same thing, and if it's approved with a few modifications, it will be substantially the same thing?
Yes, it should end up being. The take-home message probably won't change, but there will be particular aspects that can be changed. So it's a good thing in terms of the public just having easy access to what probably the main message is. But then the peer reviewers and the researcher themselves, they might disagree on a couple points that need to be teased out in this peer review process.
But these are going to be more, what's the word, so slightly more academic or arcane concepts that if you're saying doesn't really affect the final message, then for the, for a member of the public, it's not going to be... we decided it was white, now we've decided it's black. It's not going to be a completely inverted conclusion.
I think so, yeah.
Is there any formal definition of peer? Like when people hear peer review, it sort of sounds, this sounds really, it sounds important. I've sometimes wondered how the concept, what is a peer? And we all sort of know somebody's roughly on your level, but... who qualifies as a peer?
Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to think from an
editor. And even more so if you're saying that people who are doing it are rejecting.
Yeah. What would an editor look for? So an editor would look to see whether... So when you go to make recommendations for peer reviewers, you might include their name and their email address. So an editor would look, okay, does this person hold an academic position somewhere? But then there's also recommendations that can be like clinicians as well. So you don't have to have a university position to be a peer reviewer. So it might be a practitioner of some kind. At the end of the day, it's kind of up to the editors and associate editors who they feel kind of is most qualified to review a paper. So they'll usually start at someone they think is most qualified based on the topic. Oftentimes, those people will decline to review because they're too busy or they've got other papers they've got to review. And so the editor then just keeps going down the list. And sometimes journals will have like kind of a database of potential peer reviewers, and they'll just go down and they'll send out emails. So I get multiple emails a week asking me to review papers for various journals, and that's because I've sort of taken myself out of these databases, but they still come after you. Yeah, your email is still online, and other researchers will be putting my name into the system to recommend that I review their papers. So that's why they're contacting me.
The concept of an editor is somebody who takes, so like a newspaper, gets an article, tweaks it a little bit, and puts it into its final form. Where are the editors in this? I mean, what do they do? They just say, we'll put it on page 3 instead of page 5? What responsibility do they have in all of this?
Yeah, I guess it's more kind of managerial. So they're kind of, picking who to send the paper out to.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the final decision will be with, usually there's an editor-in-chief at a journal, and then underneath them, multiple associate editors. And usually it's the associate editor that does kind of the handling and makes the final decision based off of the reviewer comments that come back to them.
Yeah, so they have the push the button yes or no publish.
Yep.
But I'm assuming, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that if a paper has gone in, it's gone out for review, the reviewers have said, yes, this is okay, or this is okay with this minor change, then can the editor still reject it at that point? Can they still say at that point, no, we're just not going to publish it anyway? Or is it then it will get published?
Technically, I think they still usually hold the power to say no.
Okay. All right.
It is ultimately their decision, but because they're so kind of overloaded, I would suspect that in most cases they just go with whatever the reviewers say and relieve themselves of that burden. But if they do hold a particular bias on a certain issue, let's say the peer reviewers give a paper a mark that's kind of like somewhere in the middle, a bit borderline on whether to accept or not. If the editor has a particular bias of no, they'll be like, okay, no. But if they're more in favor, they might say yes. So on those kind of borderline papers, in terms of what the reviewers are saying, an editor can be the third kind of decision maker there. So
increasingly sounds like dark arts rather than a highly scientific process.
Yeah. Well, oh man, I've had.
Does it worry?
There are lots of crazy experiences that people have with peer review. I mean, just
because the public think it has this saintly aura.
No.
And clearly it does not.
Look, like I said, I've had very thorough feedback on some of my papers, very thoughtful feedback. Clearly the person read my paper carefully and is trying to make it better. Yeah. But I've had some really bad feedback, like the person just didn't have their coffee in the morning and was in a bad mood, and they barely read it at all. And the really unfortunate thing is that, that it takes months to hear back about these papers, and to get that sort of feedback, like someone that doesn't even take the time to read it properly, it's really sort of disheartening. And it's why, a lot of people are really frustrated with it and frustrated with academia in general. It's just one of the many parts of academia that people are frustrated with is the peer review process.
It's funny you say that, Joe. It just reminds me, I was never going to be a researcher. It's just not me. Yeah. But when we were in med school, I think in 5th year, one of the requirements was to do some sort of research project. And to be honest, I think it was just cheap labour for the researchers in the medical faculty. And yes, I'm talking about UWA. It was a long time ago. And we did this project, and our supervisor went on to become quite famous, in fact. I won't give any names on this one. Yeah. And we submitted the papers you had to do as a requirement, and we got what I considered was a fairly low mark for it. I think we got a C, and passed. Really, I shouldn't have cared. Yep. But anyway, myself, and there was 3 of us involved, went to challenge the guy who'd reviewed it. And he said, well, it was, what's the problem with this? Oh, well, you haven't done this. Well, it's actually on this page. Yep. Oh, yes. Yep. Oh. Like, no, you haven't actually read it, sunshine.
That's right.
And I was only in 5th year med school at that stage, and I was already thinking, what is with these people? And it sounds like it's gotten worse rather than any better. Dear.
That is a perfect example. That's exactly what happens.
Well, this is what you've described.
People do not. They do not read the papers carefully. It would be one thing if that happened and you got the reviewer comments back like within a week or two, because then you can just quickly move on and send it to another journal. But remember, like this is after months of waiting, and like I said, most of this research, in one way or another, funded by taxpayers. It's just it's a really problematic area right now. So
look, this is probably not where we started, but hopefully for all the listeners, this has really been an eye into a world that most people, and myself included, don't really see. Maybe I see it from nearer to the window pane. It's not really a window pane; it's like frosted glass. No transparency about it.
Yeah.
So, James, 2 points. Number one, where can people find you?
Okay.
You've got your own podcast, and you mentioned the Substack, so we'll put the link down below. But where's the best place for people to find you and get in touch with you and follow your work and thoughts?
So I'm pretty active on X or Twitter at James L. Nuzzo. And then my Substack page is a hybrid blog/podcast, and it's called The Nuzzo Letter. And that's where I put out content each week on these controversial topics that we're talking about today. And then, of course, I've got, like a Google Scholar page with all my research and stuff, too.
Okay. All right. Well, look, as we finish up, any final thoughts for the listeners, probably to bring it back to we started more about strength and resistance training and the usefulness for their health? Any sort of final thoughts you might like to leave people with?
I guess I would say that doing something is better than doing nothing, and that is supported by the research. So if all you can do is one day a week, 30 minutes, by all means, do that. Never too late to get started. So and just give it a go. It doesn't have to be the prettiest looking thing if you've never lifted weights before, but you got to just take that step, and you can always contact friends or family that might have a little bit more experience.
Or trainers.
That's right. There's lots of exercise science graduates out there looking for employment. So, contact one of them.
James, it's been an absolute pleasure having you in the studio. We'll get you back. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Dr Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, like and share. You can also follow it on all the socials. There'll be new content uploaded each week.